Post-Civil War America, as the nation rebuilt, imports were still all the rage, especially with straight razors and pocket knives, primarily made in Solingen, Germany and Sheffield, England. Around 1864, Charles Friedman and Charles Lauderjung had immigrated to America, starting the importer Friedman and Lauderjung. It must be noted that Lauderjung is a fairly famous name in Solingen, Germany for straight razors. As family lore holds, Teresa Case Champlin fashioned her husband, JBF Champlin, a suit out of burlap bags to go and interview in New York City. He was hired, this much we do know. What we don't know is his extent and relationship with Friedman and Lauderjung, because only a Mr. Jordan, based out of St. Louis, was known to officially represent Friedman and Lauderjung. Still, JBF Champlin did import through Friedman and Lauderjung, maybe other companies as well, growing his territory and sales rapidly. One interesting and controversial part of this is the usage of Indians and a Sockham chief in Cattaraugus Cutlery's later advertisements. Well, Western New York is Seneca territory, and JBF Champlin and the Case family got along quite well with them. In fact, JBF paid, named, and used them time and again for these advertisements. So everything you see is authentic, including the Sockham chief. By the late 1870s and early 1880s, it is clear that JBF Champlin only wanted to work for himself, and the small jobbing firm JBF Champlin and Son was formed in Little Valley, New York, housed out of the giant 3-story opera house in downtown Little Valley. What you are seeing are some of the rarest JBF Champlin and Son razors and knives, most likely sourced by George Korn, a prominent razor manufacturer based out of Chicago and manufactured in Germany. Critically, JBF's brothers-in-law also entered the industry: W.R., Gene, John D., and my great-great-grandfather Andrew Jackson Case, shown with their father Job Case. It is not hyperbole to say the industry would never be the same, but the industry was struggling. Labor strikes, scab workers, multiple recessions and depressions in America, and the promise of massive tariffs on imported goods to try to protect these upstart American industries. One of the biggest examples is Beaver Falls Cutlery Company in Pennsylvania. At its peak, it employed 300 employees. By 1877, labor disputes forced the company to fire all of its workers and replace them with Chinese labor. This didn't go well, and the company was forced to close in 1886. The McKinley Bill with more than double the price of imported cutlery from Europe, and JBF Champlin moved quick. He had already started reincorporating JBF Champlin and Son as Cattaraugus Cutlery by 1887, including his brothers-in-law, which is very interesting, as well as George Korn. Also included with all the machinery from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, were the largest fork and knife ever made. Manufactured in Beaver Falls in 1875, these would become the showpiece items for Cattaraugus Cutlery. The newly incorporated firm of Cattaraugus Cutlery had no lack of talent either. It is well known that Gene Case had been selling for Robeson Cutlery for years prior, and the Case brothers were already probably selling for JBF Champlin and Son. While they were stockholders in Cattaraugus Cutlery, this was short-lived. Family lore holds it that the Cases borrowed one of JBF's prized horses to take back to Spring Green, and JBF was none too pleased. Whatever happened, the Cases soon cashed out of Cattaraugus Cutlery as it was just being built. By 1890, a massive reservoir was dug high atop Mill Street in Little Valley, with the factory 200 vertical feet below. Unfortunately, the reservoir leaked, water power inadequate at best, so steam power was utilized at the new factory. For actual manufacturing talent, JBF turned to the tried and true. A foreman from Beaver Falls Cutlery came with the equipment, including other workers, and the Platts family soon joined the Champlins on Mill Street in Little Valley. Charles Platts was trained in Sheffield, a true master, worked at Northfield Knife Company in Connecticut, and brought his sons, including H.N. Platts, who later married Debbie Case. Another person who was also critical to the rise of Cattaraugus Cutlery was William W. Wilson, a blacksmith who made carriages, horseshoes, and basic butcher knives on 4th Street in Little Valley. He'd been doing so for years, and JBF obviously saw his skills. So much so that he later trademarked W.W. Wilson's very name, and the second Cattaraugus Cutlery factory, built along the railroad tracks in downtown Little Valley, was actually built for W.W. Wilson at first. This is when things get weird. Right when JBF Champlin had started manufacturing in America, the country faced a massive depression in 1893. More so, his brothers-in-law, the Cases, were already selling cutlery out in Spring Green, probably JBF's own wares. He had trademarked W.W. Wilson's name, and his factory was forever hobbled by a lack of water power due to a leaking reservoir. More so, exactly who was selling whose knives. This will be a long-term issue between the Cases and the Champlins. There's an odd company known as North American Knife Company based out of Beaver City, Nebraska, that maybe doesn't exist. The Cases were probably selling their knives, and oddly, on paper, JBF Champlin is listed as the superintendent of a factory that probably didn't exist. Though some of these knives are known to have been made by the Phoenix Knife Company in New York State, this is still another enigma in the Case-Champlin families. What is no mystery is the impact of JBF Champlin on American knife making and Little Valley itself. By the turn of the century, the Case brothers had launched their own manufacturing operation on Fair Oak Street. The Brown brothers were active, which would later become K-Bar, and countless other individuals who worked at the factories were assembling their own razors and knives at night. The Cases would soon have 32 different companies interrelated from the bigger Champlin, Case, Burl, Brown, and Platts branches of the family, and Little Valley itself would have at least 25 distinct manufacturers. And none of this would have happened without JBF Champlin, whose wife fashioned him a suit to go and interview in New York City to work for an importer. As the story goes, JBF loved leeks and picked himself way too many and made himself a big old soup. Indigestion or a heart attack, we do not know, but the father of knife making in Little Valley was gone. The Champlin dynasty would be handed over to Tint Champlin to lead the company into a new century. Just imagine what Tint Champlin had to work with at this moment. He had his factory on Mill Street, another factory downtown Little Valley by the railroad tracks, with Corn Razor right next door, and he could make anything. Dear God, look at some of these. What Tint also had a knack for was marketing, ephemera, some of the finest catalogs ever produced, advertisements, whittling competitions, you name it, Cattaraugus Cutlery was involved. Maybe more importantly to Tint and the Champlin family was the welfare of Little Valley itself. Tint combined 10 far-flung schoolhouses into a central school. The new school also included a special program for women to learn bookkeeping, secretarial work, and more advanced programs. Tint also oversaw the upgrading of the basic infrastructure in town and devoted himself to the education and the prosperity of the town as a whole. As his father had practiced, workers were still allowed to use equipment at night to make their own products to make some extra money. While Tint's uncles at Case Brothers suffered a massive fire in 1912, losing their factory, and his cousins started their own companies, Tint would actually lead a reuniting of the family. Kinfolks was formed in around 1924 to make fixed blades for Cattaraugus Cutlery and W.R. Case and Sons, with Tint and his cousin Russ Case leading the charge, having their cousin Dean Case run the factory. Tint always referred to the famous Case XX as the Case Double Cross, and with most things regarding the family, Kinfolks didn't go well, the initial structure blowing over. But Kinfolks was born. Kinfolks would be a critical supplier to both companies in Tint's swan song, capped by Admiral Byrd's expedition to the South Pole in 1938. Cattaraugus Cutlery made incredibly unique tools for Byrd to use in Antarctica, including bolo knives, seal skinners, and what you see is one of the only known skinners to actually return from Antarctica. That's me holding it, and no, you can't know who actually owns it. It'd be up to a third generation of Champlins to lead the company into World War II, with bus services all around the county to bring workers in, including the train. Cattaraugus Cutlery at that time, including Kinfolks, produced more knives than anywhere else in the world, and the wartime effort cannot be beat, with the vaunted quartermaster knife and the ingenious bailout jungle survival folding machete, one of my favorite items, just one of several dozen made for the military effort. Cattaraugus Cutlery would be awarded an E for Excellence in the Wartime Effort flag, but the war had worn the company out, literally. The machinery was defunct, needing massive upgrades, and capital to do these upgrades was simply lacking. Francis and Philip Champlin instead focused on households, cutlery for the kitchens. And this was a terrible time because cheap imports were suddenly flooding America. And what was once known as the premier cutlery company in America was now simply known as Better. The Champlin family at least controlled their own fate and chose in 1963 to close Cattaraugus Cutlery, some 99 years after JBF Champlin went to New York City in a suit fashioned by his wife, Teresa Case Champlin. All the equipment, fittings, blades, blanks, everything was auctioned off, and Cattaraugus Cutlery was thought left to the ages. But the Champlins had overlooked the trademark, and one A.G. Russell, a knife dealer from the South, re-registered the Cattaraugus Cutlery name under his own. Though A.G. Russell released limited numbers of Cattaraugus Cutlery patterns, the brand itself seemed to flounder and fade into history. The lack of a dating system for Cattaraugus Cutlery's many offerings over the years seemed to hinder the collectibles market, because the knife that you're holding may have been made in 1910 or 1950. You didn't know. In 1985, JBF Champlin's Opera House burned due to arson. And then the ultimate tragedy, in 2015, while a local family was trying to save the factory, Cattaraugus Cutlery's plant number 2, originally built for W.W. Wilson, burned. And then something unusual happened. Pat Cullen of Cattaraugus, New York, started the American Museum of Cutlery in Cattaraugus, mostly focused on Cattaraugus Cutlery. And collectors took note. More so, the affordability of Cattaraugus Cutlery's many beautiful knives kept attracting collectors because they were fairly priced and not suspect to counterfeiting. And then, in 2023, a miracle happened. A party directly related to Case acquired the trademark for Cattaraugus Cutlery. As with any venture involving the Champlins and the Cases, who knows what's going to happen? But we sure hope it happens here in Little Valley, where it all began.